I'm Des Speakman, and I've been asked about my career in advertising, which of course starts before advertising. I started off as a law school student, became an admitted practitioner, moved into marketing, worked for an English company called Clark's Shoes for 2 years in England and 4 years in Australia. Finished up as their marketing manager, and then left to join a market research company and spent 6 years in market research, and was then headhunted out of market research as managing director of the Campaign Palace Melbourne. I spent 9 years as managing director of the Campaign Palace Melbourne, during which time we opened an office in New Zealand to service the then Ansett account. And in 1990 I became the CEO of the Campaign Palace and held that position for around 10 years before taking 2 years off, and then came back into the advertising industry for 2 years as managing director of Whybin TBWA Melbourne, and then for the last 7 years as CEO of TBWA in Australia. That's my career all over far too quickly. I think in terms of defining moments, I think I was very fortunate in my career that at every stage I had a mentor, and I found that having a mentor, it was incredibly valuable. Now, a mentor can be a direct mentor, someone who says, I will mentor you. And we do have mentoring programs these days, and they can be, when they're done well, very successful. But one of the things that anyone can do these days is to identify someone in their organisation and think who they respect and admire, and then try and learn as much as they can from that person. And that's an informal mentoring, but I think mentoring was incredibly valuable to me at each stage in my career. And I used to say, you've got to look at your career as a series of steps. You can't go from the ground floor to the first floor in one step. It's impossible. And that's what your working career is like. And each step takes you from where you started to where you want to be. And you know when it's time to take the next step, because you can't go any further on that step. And it's a really simple analogy, but I think it's a good one. And each stage prepares you for something else. I didn't realise that what the stages that I was going through were preparing me for a successful career in advertising. But the reality is that they were. It just took me some time to realise that advertising was where my skill set was going to allow me to perform exceptionally well. You always, I think, when you're faced with a career change, you step back and you think, is this right? And the reality is that you never know before you make a decision about whether it's a good one, a bad one, or an indifferent one. But I was always of the view that once you make that decision, then you've just got to throw yourself into it with 100% commitment to make it work. I was full of trepidation entering the advertising industry, because even though I'd worked with a number of agencies, I wasn't quite sure whether it was the industry for me. But it was made easier because I had done a lot of work as a researcher for the Campaign Palace, and in my previous career at Clark's Shoes, the Campaign Palace had been my advertising agency, or rather Clark's advertising agency. So I knew the people, and I knew the culture, and I knew the values of the Campaign Palace, and that took some of the trepidation out of the decision. But the sealer for me was that they had offered me the job of managing director. I'd been offered jobs previously in advertising as an account director, and I decided, rightly or wrongly, that wasn't for me. I didn't see that as being the fulfilment of my career. But I was asked to go to the Campaign Palace one Friday afternoon, I remember it distinctly, by Lionel Hunt. I assumed it was to be briefed on a job, and I sat down and Lionel said, well, we want you to join the Campaign Palace as Managing Director. And that was something that had held enormous appeal, because I really thought that the end goal for me was in management. And so that gave me a stepping stone into management. Whether I was going to be any good or not was a totally different question, and that's where you say, well, can I or can't I? And it does fill you with trepidation. But because I knew the guys, etc., I said, it took me about 2 minutes to say yes. Well, the Palace at its peak probably had 250, and I think TBWA probably about the same. But the reality about my job is that I wasn't managing all of the staff. I saw my job as one of managing the managers. So that the head of account service, the head of finance, the head of production, they were the people that I ultimately managed. So I probably never ever had any more than 5 or 6 people, who I really thought that I had to manage directly. I think it's a really difficult question to answer about your management style. When I joined the Campaign Palace, they had a non-executive chairman, and one of the profound things he said to me when I first started was, no matter how you think you're performing, other people will have different opinions, and it's very, very true. So I don't really know what my management style was. That said, I think that I was certainly open. I was very, very goal oriented, very people oriented, and I was certainly strong on building and maintaining a culture and a value system. I think dealing with conflict's always difficult, and I don't think that I necessarily dealt with conflict always particularly well. I think as you mature in the job, you become more adept at dealing with conflict, because you're more considered and less reactionary. I think when you're younger and there's conflict, there's a tendency, there certainly was in my case, here's a problem, what's the solution? Later on, the first thing would always be to step back and to consider it at a more macro level before making any judgments. But I think one of the hallmarks I think of good leadership is establishing clear values and a clear behaviour pattern, and making sure that everyone understands what that is. And then when people fall short of that standard, it's really important very quickly to address that. I think one of the great challenges, of leadership is not only in setting standards, but it's making sure that those standards are being adhered to. I think the first thing is managing people is very, very difficult, because everybody's different, and I think that you've got to try and understand what motivates individuals, rather than treating everyone in the same way. I think that you've got to deal, particularly with your key reporting people, you've got to deal with them with a knowledge about what motivates them and what drives them, and I think you've got to set standards, and you've got to set goals, and you've got to regularly monitor performance against those goals. There's an old adage that if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there, and I think that's absolutely true. People coming to work each day need to know what they're coming to work for, other than I'm going to get paid some money. So they need clear direction, and I think one of the things that I learned was how critically important it was that people not only had job descriptions that were fairly simple but clear and concise, but that they were regularly evaluated against those goals so that they knew how they were performing. And my view was always, and my advice to my managers was, if at the end of a year, when you're reviewing one of your staff, they're shocked at the review, it means you haven't done a particularly good job during the course of the year. Because if you're managing them effectively, when the final end of year performance review comes around, they know whether they've done a great job, a reasonable job, or they've fallen short. So managing people against set goals consistently, I think is very important. Accomplishments. I'm very proud of the Campaign Palace. I was very fortunate to be there during its halcyon days, and the fact that it dominated the Australian Advertising Awards for 30 years. It had a huge profile both within Australia and outside, and the fact that it was the first advertising agency chosen into the Advertising Hall of Fame, it makes me very, very proud. Anyone that goes and looks at a history reel of the Campaign Palace, I think, can't fail but to be impressed with both the quality of the creative thinking, but also the broad repertoire of work that the Campaign Palace did. And there are so many great campaigns done during that time. But the ones that stand out in my memory were, for their sheer consistency and quality of thinking, were the Australian Meat and Livestock work done by the Palace in Sydney, the Westpac 2000 Olympic campaign, again Campaign Palace Sydney, the Target work done by the Campaign Palace Melbourne, and the work for Hole Proof. But two wonderful campaigns that are associated with sport, which is a love and a passion of mine, very Australian thing, of course, were Up There Kazali, and I'd like to see that. Up There Kazali done as a promo for Channel 7 for their football, and then I'd like to see that, which was done for the AFL, and they were both wonderful campaigns. I think good leadership always contributes to success. I think one of the great challenges that we've got today is a failure of leadership in so many different areas. Because what great leadership does at its best is provide a vision, and then build a set of values and behaviours that drive the business inexorably towards achieving and realising its vision, and then it manages on a day-to-day basis. It manages the business against those things, and that makes it relatively simple. If a business doesn't have a clear vision and a clear understanding about what it's there to do, how do you consistently over a period of time make decisions? You can make a decision here and it sounds like it might be right, and then you make one here and there, but they're unrelated. The one thing that good leadership provides, with a clear vision and set of beliefs and behaviours and values, is everyone drives in consistently together in a particular way, and you can measure everything against, is it helping us to achieve that vision? So leadership to me is even more important today. Whilst the communications industry's changed significantly, I think leadership's got an even more important role to play, because the more complex it becomes, the more critical clear leadership is.